All right, welcome everyone to June's community event. So today we're being joined by Sebastian Chowie from Alula, and I'll leave it to Taufik to introduce Spiral Blue and what's going to be happening today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today, everyone. My name is Taufik. I'm founder and CEO of Spiral Blue. So at Spiral Blue, our mission is really to improve the accessibility, affordability of Earth observation data using technology such as our space edge computers and space edge services. And our mission is really to be able to allow this to solve huge problems such as climate change and other problems that we're facing in the future. So that's Spiral Blue. And our goal with these community events and with our community program more broadly, which will hopefully be ramping up later this year, is that we've gotten a lot of benefit from these sort of community events and community programs. We've been to a lot of events. We've done programs such as the Gravity Challenge and the Maxar Spatial Challenge, courtesy of Sebastian as well. And we've drawn a lot of benefit. So we're hoping to give a bit back. And as we grow, we want you guys to grow as well with us. And so with that, I'll hand it back to Gavin, who will tell you a bit more about the community event.
Yeah, so what's going to happen today is that we'll begin with Sebastian's speaker talk in about a couple minutes, and afterwards that will be followed by a Q&A. So in the right-hand side, you'll have a chat box where you can put in your questions, and during the Q&A, Taufik will then ask those questions to Sebastian. And so that should be around 11:50 to 12 p.m. Sydney time for the Q&A, and then afterwards we'll have half an hour where we'll go back to the lounges and we'll talk to each other and kind of get to know about who's in the room today. And we all say hi, don't feel shy. So yeah, we'll begin introducing who Sebastian is.
Yeah, so joining me today is the lovely Sebastian Chowie. So Sebastian is the co-founder and CEO of Alula, an SME that provides a single point of access for a global network of satellite imagery. Sebastian is a serial space entrepreneur who was also the first Australian to launch a mission to the International Space Station with his previous company, CubeRider. As a result of his achievements, he has established a prominent profile within the growing Australian commercial space sector. His current venture, Alula, aggregates a global network of satellite imagery suppliers through a single cloud-based access point, eliminating the need for multiple integration points, legal contracts, pricing, payment models, and searches. Alula is also a strong supporter of the international Earth observation community, with partners including NASA, ESA, NSPO, Maxar, and SpaceWheel. So I'd like to welcome Sebastian to the stage. Could we have a round of applause for Sebastian at the bottom?
Thanks, Taufik. Appreciate it. That's very nice of you guys. Yeah, so really great intro. Appreciate it. My name's Sebastian, and I'm here today to talk about, accessing satellite data and the problems in the industry. But before I begin, I really want to do a shout out to Spiral Blue for the really, really cool achievement of sending their space edge computer into orbit very, very soon. The countdown has begun, and I'm very excited to see that. I can't wait for it to, be in space. So, round of applause for Spiral Blue there as well. I'll just do a quick screen share now, so I can just get the slides up. Don't have too many slides today, so not going to be super intense. Where are we? Okay, here we go. Whoa, not the thank you slide. There, hopefully everyone can see that. But yeah, so my name is Sebastian from Alula. And before I really get into the whole presentation, I'd like to start off with a story that I learned about a couple of years ago when I started this journey. There are a lot of things happening on the Earth today, all around the globe, that could be, made better or improved or just stopped with satellite imagery. And one story that really sort of sticks out in my mind is what happened in Brazil a couple of years ago. There was a mining company called Vale. They're one of the largest iron ore exporters in the world, and they had a mine deep in the heart of the Amazon jungle. They had a tailings dam there to store all the toxic waste that was produced by the mine. And unfortunately, that tailings dam collapsed, and it killed hundreds of people, caused billions of dollars worth of damage, and destroyed parts of the Amazon rainforest for decades to come. It was a huge international disaster. Financial markets as well went into a tizzy. Iron ore commodities absolutely went crazy afterwards, the commodity prices. There were huge inquests into what had happened. And the kicker is that there was SAR imagery over that site. People were collecting satellite data over that site, just as routine sort of monitoring. And you could have potentially been monitoring the fractures in the dam wall before it actually had happened. And so, AlUla isn't about mining, but I think it's a really, really great story that illustrates the power of satellite imagery and how you can change the world with this kind of data as well. And so I guess everyone keeps talking about the satellite imagery industry, the Earth observation, the commercial Earth observation industry. It's super exciting, don't get me wrong, but it's also super new, right? If we really think about it, the EO industry for commercial is maybe about 10 years old. I'm sort of exaggerating there, but it's really new, right? It's a very new industry. And no one really knows how to crack it. And what we're seeing is that there is so much more money being poured into it. There's so much more excitement around it, but everyone's still trying to figure out a whole bunch of basic things, right? And the reason that is because the majority of satellite operators mainly cater towards sort of government defense. And so I guess the fundamental assertion that I'm making with this presentation is that this massive industry, $4 billion satellite imaging industry is broken. And there are a few reasons for that, and I'm going to go through those now. Firstly, demand for satellite imagery commercially has almost doubled since 2018. But a lot of entrenched industry practices mean that it's really hard to adopt EO data at scale. You've got government and defense using it. They're massive consumers of EO data, satellite imagery, but there are so many commercial players and emerging commercial players that just are forced to use substitutes, are forced to do a whole bunch of different things in order to get the information that they need or generate the insights that they need, because satellite imagery is just really, really difficult to access. And so working on this problem for a few years now, my team and I, we've really sort of chalked it down to a few different things that need to be solved, right? And these are everything I'm talking about is from our customer experiences. So we're talking with AlUla users, AlUla customers, and we're getting direct feedback from them, and we're learning about the problems, firsthand, essentially, the latest problems in the industry. And so, things like large minimum purchase orders, extensive delivery times and delays, complex technical and legal barriers all create this massive friction for commercial customers. And I think the best way to describe that friction is the user experience, right? Getting satellite imagery is a bad user experience, right? That's fundamentally what it is today. It's tricky, it costs a lot of money, everything I've just said there, basically. And so that's another reason why this industry, it's kind of remarkable, because the industry is still growing in spite of this terrible UX, right? And so I think if we could somehow unlock that, I think the EO industry could, grow tenfold because of because of these sort of small changes that we could make together as an industry. Now, what we're finding as a company is that commercial customers are increasingly demanding higher and higher volumes of small satellite imagery, right? And what I mean by small satellite imagery is that the area of interest geographically is small, right? And the way you buy satellite imagery as a commercial user, consumer, is you buy it per square kilometer most of the time, right? So a satellite image, say a 50 centimeter resolution satellite image, might cost anywhere between $10 to say $20 a square kilometer, right? And so you're buying per square kilometer. And so if a satellite imaging company has a minimum order quantity of say 25 square kilometers, that means you're paying hundreds of dollars, right? And so for government and defense, that's not a problem because they've got big budgets. But if you're a startup and you have your startup idea revolves around you maybe monitoring 10,000 different sites all across the globe, and those sites are all less than a square kilometer in size, and you have to pay $500 every single time you want an image over 10,000 different sites, you can't do that fundamentally, right? And so we're seeing a lot of these new innovative ideas get blocked by this whole minimum order problem, right? And we're seeing a lot more customers wanting small orders, either to test out their products, to build out scalable solutions. And that's a big thing, right? And so these customers as well are also requiring automated and scalable transactions and distribution. Now, what I mean by that is traditionally when you buy a satellite image, it's fairly manual, right? You're on the phone to a satellite operator, you're talking to them. It's just a huge hassle, right? And then once you actually pay for the imagery, then you receive it via email through an FTP link. Okay, that's what 99% of the traditional imagery procurement methodologies involve. And so our customers are starting to get fed up with this. And we're starting to see this because, we live in the 21st century, a world of APIs and instant delivery. I could order a pizza on my mobile phone right now, but I can't order a satellite image. And the satellite image should feasibly easier to be ordered because it's just data. It's not actually anything physical. So existing operators cannot cost effectively sell small quantities of imagery. And this is, again, due to sort of outdated tech and sales models. So when you're talking about it, if you're hiring a $200,000 a year, business development person to go and sell satellite imagery, that business development person is going to be highly incentivized not to sell imagery for $20 a pop. They're very incentivized to go to the biggest vendor or the biggest consumer, which is, again, usually government or defense in that region. And then they're going to try and sell them a 500,000 USD contract, right? And that cycle is sort of self-perpetuating, where you keep going and you keep hiring these BD managers, which is fine. It's a great business model, but it's a great business model if you're trying to do B2G or B to defense, right? That's the business model. And so what we're seeing, again, is all of these problems are cutting out the opportunity for new players to build new apps that could solve new and interesting challenges. So through all this research, through all this data we've collected, we've realized that there's a lot of people that want satellite data. People keep talking about it. People keep like, oh man, if I could have like an image over my holiday house or something, if I could go and monitor my, real estate investment portfolio, if I could go and monitor the shoreline for soil erosion, if I could go and do X, Y, Z, there's so many new use cases coming out almost every single day. People are designing new apps that rely on satellite imagery all the time in order to create different kinds of insights for different markets and people. But what we're seeing is that there's a divide, right? There's a divide in the products that are available. So you've got the traditional commercial stuff, which are, you've got the incumbents like Maxar, Planet, and Airbus, and they're doing good work. I mean, it's not bad work at all that they're doing. It's just that these incumbents have a specific sales model and a specific way that they want to sell their data, which is totally fine. But that means it sort of excludes these sort of smaller value clients, which there are a lot more of coming out of the woodwork. And so what these small value clients usually do is they usually have to make do with the free stuff, essentially. So that's NASA Landsat from USGS, that's Sentinel from the Copernicus programs, and there's a few other free data sources as well. But the problem with those data sources, as you guys may already know, is that those data sources are very low resolution in comparison to, Maxar's U-Butte 30 centimeter. And so that creates this sort of product divide in the market where there's this no man's land where a lot of these people are consuming huge amounts of satellite imagery at the free scale, at the free tier. But we believe that a lot of them would probably move on, if they could, to access higher resolution imagery if it was affordable enough. That's fundamentally the assertion we're trying to make here, is that there's a gap here and there's this problem that the high resolution product isn't accessible enough due to cost and high pricing. And I guess, just to throw you some stats, we found that about 200 petabytes last year or the year before were downloaded from, I think it was a Copernicus program. You might have to fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was a Copernicus program. So people are consuming this free data at scale, tremendous scale. Hundreds of thousands of people are signing up for these platforms, right? But imagine what they could do if they had access to, 1 meter resolution instead of 10 or 50 centimeter resolution. And I guess that's sort of the world we're trying to create here, and the world we think the industry should be moving towards. So this is basically everything I explained before. This is the process, essentially. We've had to live this process as a company, and everyone else that wants high resolution commercial satellite data is forced to go through a similar process, right? So if you're in the market, say you're a geospatial analyst or you're a developer and you're working for a company and someone says we need to monitor XYZ sites and we need to do it affordably and drone isn't an option, say for whatever reason, maybe the area is too remote, maybe there's certain aviation restrictions in your country that mean that you can't access it or can't fly a drone over, maybe the aerial imagery providers are too expensive, so you look at satellite, right? But then satellite is this whole complex ecosystem that no one has really aggregated before. And so you can see this is sort of the journey that a typical customer makes, right? They'll go and find a satellite supplier online or by personal referral. One of their buddies might say, hey, Airbus is pretty good, and they are. And then they'll go and begin discussions with the sales rep in their region. And that can take some time, and once they've assessed the data and they enter into legal negotiations, they start talking about how the customer can represent this data to their end users as well, how the minimum orders affects pricing. All of those kinds of things are important, right? To the satellite operator, not so much to the customer. The customer just wants the data. And then finally, once that's happened, they agree to those terms. They can start searching the available imagery archive for this different supplier, and then the problem here is that different suppliers have different collection regimes in orbit, right? So that means these different satellite operators are collecting imagery at different rates over different locations all the time. So every archive looks different. Okay, and that's the problem you're facing. So Airbus might have something that Maxar doesn't, and Maxar might have something that Planet doesn't, and so on and so forth. And there are hundreds more satellite operators than just those three that I keep mentioning. And so because of that, all these different archives are not they're not comprehensive enough for most customers, is what we're finding. Now, once they've identified the data, they submit a purchase request and they receive a quote. If the quote's on budget, then they can start the PO and everything like that. But if the quote isn't, then they have to go back to searching. And so you can see a few loops here as well in this system. Once a purchase request is submitted and the invoice is paid, then you can actually start, then you wait a few more days for your imagery to be processed, which is an entire technical problem in and of itself. And then finally you receive the order via an FTP, and no one really likes FTPs anymore when you live in a world of AWS S3 buckets and Google and Azure and stuff like that. Why are we receiving stuff in FTP? And then from there, either you probably want to import it into your local GIS processing platform, or if you're building an app, that could be a different story. And so if you are building an app where you need scalable access to satellite data, then this whole system doesn't work, because if you're building an automated system and you have to deal with this manual system, the two clash all the time, and it's not going to really be helpful for you. And so this is something that just doesn't really exist in industry super well at the moment. And so I guess for us, or for everyone here, it means that it's really hard for new players to start getting in the game, What I was hoping to do now is probably walk you guys through maybe like the typical example of how a new startup might try and integrate satellite imagery, or the problems that those startups face. There's a bunch of new startups that have emerged over the last, say, 5-6 years, who all are claiming to democratize access to satellite imagery, commodify intelligence from space, all these things. And it's a really great thing to be doing, and I really wish them well. But the problems that they're facing from their suppliers, the satellite operators, are large. They're difficult to overcome, and that's because all of these entrenched industry practices. And And so, I guess walking you through what we've seen in the past, this is again from some of our customers, from some people over in the States and in Europe who are building out their own sort of apps, to solve specific problems on Earth. These companies, they might come up with an amazing algorithm or idea. One of them that, is really popular right now is using satellite imagery for financial intelligence products. So you guys may have heard of, like, say, the Walmart car park counter, for instance, where a bunch of companies, I think Orbital Insight is probably the one to beat there, but like they've come up with a product that uses, it ingests satellite imagery at scale across a whole bunch of different Walmarts around the country in the US. And then it counts how many cars are in that car park. And then they figured out that you can correlate the number of cars in a car park and create a predictive model to understand where basically how much revenue Walmart's generated, and that can influence stock price and it can influence quarterly reports. And so a lot of hedge funds and people are buying that specific intelligence product from these companies now. But in order to go and negotiate those deals with satellite operators to get the data feed, that's a huge hassle, right? And if you're a new company and you're just starting out, that could be life or death, right? You've got this great app idea, and if you're just building a normal app on, say, the Apple App Store, and it's like I don't know, Uber or you whatever else, the only thing you really have to contend with is your own technical development and maybe a few other third-party integrations. But if you're trying to build an app that relies on satellite imagery, you've got this whole other uphill battle that you're probably not very aware of, right? Again, due to the entrenched industry practices. And so this is something that a lot of new companies face, and then they get sort of disenfranchised, right? So we've spoken to a bunch of companies and they're like, oh, we've negotiated commercial imagery arrangements maybe with 2 or 3 suppliers, and then we ask them, well, how is that working for you? And they say, well, it's all right. It doesn't give us the coverage we need. It doesn't give us the amount of data we need, the revisit time or anything else. But they're making do essentially, and they're paying a lot of money. They're paying top dollar. In some cases, some companies we are talking to are paying upwards of 20 to 30,000 USD a year to access this data, and they're paying it up front as well. So because of that, you've got this high capital expenditure. You're a startup. You don't have much money in the bank. You're trying to develop this technology to service a customer base. And really, the satellite imagery is not necessarily an afterthought, but it's something that is necessary for you to deliver the service to your end user, your customer base, but it's not the thing that you should be focusing on as a company. And I think it's really, really important to make that sort of, I guess, or to highlight that, because a lot of companies, a lot of new players in the game get bogged down in that, and some of them die because of that. So it is very tough. And I guess this is just all about highlighting those problems, right? But yeah, so I guess here at this point, I hope I've done a fairly good job at maybe helping everyone here understand some of the problems that companies are facing with access to satellite data. And I think maybe it's good to talk about solutions as well, or what we see at Alula as the right thing to do in order to grow the industry, right? The industry is growing regardless, but I think a lot of people are making do with, a suboptimal or a workaround, a patch, essentially. And so, realistically, it comes down to 3 things that people need to do well, or satellite operators need to do well, or people looking to solve this problem need to do well, in order to make it accessible for new users and new application developers as well. So firstly, you need to solve the technical access. So you need to figure out how to automate a large part of the delivery of satellite imagery, right? This is fundamentally a big data problem, and I think people haven't been treating it as such for a long time. So what I mean by that is you've got a few layers to this, right? You've got, starting with the satellite operator, you've got the processing of the data that they're collecting. How do you automate that, and how do you scale it out, right? So when someone places an order, it should be instant delivery, or instant processing at least, right? You've got a bunch of different things you need to be doing, like georeferencing, radiometric corrections, atmospheric, sometimes pan sharpening of the data. And that's just for multispectral, so multispectral satellite imagery, that's red, green, blue, near infrared. If you've got superspectral, hyperspectral, SAR, or any other kind of data set, the pre-processing is going to be different. And then you need a delivery methodology as well, right? So, API, a beautiful UI. There's a bunch of companies that are doing stuff like this now. So like Ellipsis Drive, for instance, is creating a really, really great delivery methodology for just geospatial data in general. There are a bunch of companies trying to solve this problem about sharing geospatial data really easily. And so this is part of that technical access, right? How does someone just sign up, create an account, and start streaming data? It shouldn't be a 3-month discussion process, right? People don't have that kind of time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is really legal access and usage rights. So my co-founder, Aaron, has worked on this a lot in terms of negotiating access to satellite data sets, in terms of the user license agreements as well, or the end user license agreements as well, sorry. And these can be very prohibitive sometimes as well. So all of those legal issues, I think, need to be solved before we can really move on as an industry and start creating better value for people around us in the community. And then finally, you've got the aggregation of data. And so the aggregation of data is really interesting because it requires a bunch of players to work together effectively that are all technically competing. And so because of that, you've got this interesting kind of problem that emerges where, no one satellite operator could become an aggregator. You need a third party, essentially. But what aggregation of data does is actually really special. It saves so much time. And there are a bunch of really great aggregators out there as well, but it saves a lot of time around having to go and decide between or compare the market, right? Because we've found so many different customers all the time are looking for satellite imagery, but they don't really care where the data is coming from as long as it suits their needs. And so that's a really, really big problem that people are facing today. And that goes back to the slide I was talking to before about the new company that's trying to maybe start out. If they have to aggregate that themselves, that can cost millions of dollars. If you're talking about hiring BD teams to go out and develop relationships with satellite operators, if you're talking about hiring dev teams to go and build a technical integration pipeline or a technical streaming pipeline from the satellite data archive to the point of ingestion for the application. If you're talking about hiring legal teams as well to go and negotiate those end user license agreements so that you can go and effectively do what you need to do with the data and provide value to your end users, that's a huge issue. And if you're doing that for one company, you might be able to do that, right? But if you need more than just the data that company, that satellite operator can provide, and you maybe need to do it across 10 or 15 different operators, that becomes a massive headache. It's almost impossible considering the amount of funding an early stage startup gets to the level of work required to actually get a comprehensive archive database of satellite imagery. So I think fundamentally the industry has a lot of teething problems or issues, but that's sort of what you get from an early stage industry like this. I think a lot of these issues will be solved as well over time. Different organizations will be tackling different things, but it's imperative that we do solve them. These are going to be the biggest things, I think, that drive change in the EO industry in the next decade. If we can solve these as a community, I think you won't be able to recognize the kinds of, the before and after, what people were doing before to make do compared to what people are building now to solve amazing and, crazy challenges around the world. So yeah, I guess that's the majority of my presentation done. I'm happy to talk about anything else in more detail if you'd like. Feel free to reach out to me or visit the website as well. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sebastian. That was a fantastic talk, very insightful. I'm happy to say that we are working together, though we can't quite announce what that is specifically just yet. We are very happy to be working together at Spiral Blue with Sebastian's company, Alula. definitely solving the right problems for this industry. So are there any questions? If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I guess while we wait for some questions to come in, so Sebastian's CTO, Scott Owens, is also on the event today. So if you have any more of the technical questions, we're happy to have Scott come on to answer those. And so I guess as a initial question, how did you come to this idea, Seb? Because your last company was QBrider, obviously a very different area.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I get that a lot, actually. So what I've noticed, so fundamentally, you can take what Alul is doing and apply it to any aspect of the space industry today, right? So we're talking about Earth observation, but in general, the space industry has a lot of these, I guess, commercialization problems, right? Where if you're looking at rocket launch, if you're looking at telecommunications, if you're looking at other kinds of aspects there, it's really hard to commercialize just to commercialize these assets. And from the stuff I learned at QBrider, I guess the story here is we launched a piece of hardware to the International Space Station. The hardware was around helping students run experiments in the form of software that they've written on the ISS. And we noticed that once the mission was over, we had to pay a lot of money to either bring it back down to Earth or let it burn up in orbit. And I just thought that was a really funny waste of resources there. And I realized, I guess, how much the space industry is really funded by government, and there's not a lot of commercial incentive to be more conservative with how you utilize resources in orbit, right? And so, with that framework in my mind, with that thinking, I realized that, there were a whole bunch of different emerging industries in orbit right now, but the one that sort of spoke to us the most at Alula was the EO industry. Now, the reason why is because the EO industry is producing some of the world's most valuable data sets ever created, but barely anyone, when you look at it relative to data consumed, say consumer data or other kinds of data sets that people consume commercially, this data is being relatively untapped, which just blew my mind. And, I've got the background in the space industry, but not so much the Earth observation or the GIS industry, which is that's been a journey in learning as well in and of itself. And so we tried to apply that sort of marketplace mindset and framework to this industry, where we realized there was a disparate supply and there was emerging opportunity in terms of demand. So all of these new players were coming online, like I mentioned before. And so if we could effectively create a framework or a way to link these players up really effectively, you basically become the market. And so we realized that this is sort of where we needed to play in order to create sort of or in order to solve that problem of commercialization of assets in orbit, really. And we're hoping, ultimately, we hope that this will drive more assets, more satellites, more rockets, more usage of space, because, we're all space nerds. So, and we're just really looking at it from a commercial lens, a really commercial lens. We're taking a lot of, I guess, for lack of a better term, like Silicon Valley ideas and methodologies, and applying it to the space industry, or specifically the geospatial Earth observation industry. And we're getting a bit of success with it now. So I think that's sort of really what we're trying to work on, is taking these existing business models and frameworks that have been tried in so many other industries, and then applying it to the EO industry as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. So a question from Jasmine Muir from Frontier SI. She says, great presentation, Seb.
Thank
do
you.
you find that clients need to do further pre-processing of the imagery after they purchase it and before they can use it? And do they have the capability to do this, for example, auto-rectification?
Good question. We get so many clients coming back to us very surprised that the imagery isn't to a certain standard, either pre-processing or some other sort of delivery standard. And I think it just speaks to the lack of standardization in the industry as a whole. My CTO, Scott Owens, always goes on about how the different terminologies mean different things to different satellite operators. So for instance, like the L1 processing or the L processing for satellite imagery, it almost has a universally different meaning. I think Scott's just jumped on the stage. If Scott wants to speak to that a little bit, please go for it.
There we are. Pardon me. Yeah, one of the really common ones we see people come back is that satellite imagery is often distributed in, as it's referred to, bands. So there'll be a separate file for the red information versus the green versus the near infrared. And this is drastically different to what a lot of people, particularly in fields like machine learning and related fields, are used to. So there's a big expectation gap for a lot of users between what they're getting from the satellite and what they were hoping to get from it. So we've been working to try and close that gap a bit, but that's certainly an ongoing.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's definitely an area that needs a lot more standardization. So glad that you guys are working on that. It's a question from Paul Hilton, who's a student at UNSW. Asks, is ground resolution an issue from a security point of view? I.e., are there governments still trying to limit ground resolution? And is it too late for that? Or is that something that satellite builders or sensor designers need to worry about?
Great question. We've run into problems like this. So it depends on what country, right? So Israel and India are two ones that come to mind. There's a lot of legislation in India right now, a lot of talk about legislation and changing of the rules and the laws. Right now, as far as Alula is aware, you can't sell satellite imagery to an Indian person or an Indian company over India, right? That's a thing. Israel, up until very recently, has pushed the US Congress to limit the quality of resolution available over the country. And there's certain countries. It depends. It's honestly, it's a geopolitical thing. It's a bit Wild West in some ways as well. Like there's no international body standardizing any of this. And so I think there's a great opportunity and a great responsibility to play a role in standardizing this data set and standardizing the way countries are seen from space as well, because it's a challenging thing, and there are a lot of different things. It's not just countries. I guess it's also going deeper. It's like defense, right? You've got a whole bunch of different people. Everyone's launching a satellite right now, and all these different countries who have different, requirements and needs are launching these assets into orbit, and they can image their enemies. They can image the people that they're not so friendly with, and then they can sell that commercially to anyone that wants to buy it anywhere in the world. It is really, really sort of getting more interesting as more satellite operators come online. So yeah, I think that's something that Alula is learning to tackle now, and we're building out, we're codifying sort of things in our infrastructure and our API to help limit that, because obviously we want to play by the rules. We want to be good actors in this space, but at the same time, the laws are changing, views are changing as well. Because it's not just countries; it's even like people. People always ask us like, "Oh, can you see me? In my backyard?" It's like, technically, I mean. If we had a high enough resolution image, potentially.
It may be like 1 or 2 pixels.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a thing that people are concerned about, and it's captured the public's attention as well, how this imagery is being utilized. And so, collectively as a community, we need to be good stewards of this technology and data.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose you can't tell me, even if this has happened, but has a a black sedan with well-suited individuals and sunnies come up to you yet and said, "Here's a list of locations to not distribute images of"?
No, it's not happened. It's not happened.
Okay.
We're the other thing is that we're purely commercial. We like our mandate really, we've done work for government before, but our mandate, our focus is commercial. So we believe that by commercializing this data, getting more businesses using it, you're going to create, an awesome future for people as well. And I think that that's sort of really the focus of Alula. And we're seeing that already. There's so many of our customers, so many of our users are, once they've solved the access issue, they're creating amazing products that, climate modeling, carbon auditing, Vale dam wall monitoring, all these kinds of things. And so genuinely, we're trying to foster the creation of those kinds of use cases, not so much the dodgy stuff.
Yeah. And I guess one last comment from Julian Grudzicki, I hope I pronounced that correctly, regarding Jasmine's query. There are image processing consultancies that have been around for a number of years that these clients can access. So I suppose that may be, I'm not sure if you're involved in that area, Julian, but I suppose that's definitely something that Alula's clients may be interested in.
No, absolutely. I guess just to speak to that as well, quickly, people are also looking more and more for an automated solution with the pre-processing. So, because I guess you're moving, the industry's moving, right? One other thing that I probably should have mentioned in the talk is that, 10, 15 years ago, people were buying an image and eyeballing it, right? Then computer processing became powerful enough to start taking the imagery and maybe creating interesting maps out of it. Now we're moving into the land of cloud computing, AI, much more crazier kinds of data analysis. And so we're moving away from professional services to productized apps, essentially, which means that people are now going and just trying to create a workflow that will ingest data and probably other types of data as well, not just satellite imagery, but you might be getting AIS beacon data, you might be getting consumer sentiment data, you might be getting a whole bunch of other stuff, right? And then turning that into a product that people can consume, because they don't want to consume the satellite imagery.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Sebastian, and thanks for joining us as well, Scott. Really insightful talk. I have put a link to a feedback form, so if you have any thoughts or anything like that, it's just a very short form, so that'll be very helpful. We've moved today to a morning slot from our normal evening slot, so I think the numbers are a bit lower today for that reason. Hopefully we'll get more people attending next time. But I'll hand it back over to Gavin to wrap things up. Are you with us, Gavin? Yes, there he is.
Yeah, so if everyone can give a nice round of applause using the reactions to Scott and Sebastian for their amazing chat today. So yeah, thank you so much, Seb. Thank you so much, Scott. Yeah, we're also really glad to be partnering with you guys. Yeah, so what's going to happen now is we're going to head back to the lounge. Here we can just join a table or mingle with each other. Feel free to say hi to each other, reach out to each other. If you can also probably hassle Scott and Seb in there if you have any further questions that you're too scared to ask here. So thank you all. I'll see you all back in the lounge.